Thank you, everyone, for listening, and thank you for having me. So, I would like to talk to you about markets and the point of view of economists in terms of how can they influence social behavior, and in turn, how this can affect the environment. And this research, it's been done, or it will be done, I should say, in collaboration with Joshua Sinner, Michelle Barnes, and Georgina that you just saw. Now, I should warn you about something in the beginning, that this research is in the earliest of stages, so it's just beginning. We're basically connecting two streams of literature that hasn't been connected before, but even at this stage, we're able to give some insights, some interesting and some important insights for the environment, for ecosystems, and particularly for the governance of fisheries, fish, and coral reefs in particular. So, adding to that, you probably won't be seeing any cool graphs or maps in this presentation, but I'm sure that there should be some stock photos somewhere. So, let's start first by trying to identify why do we care about the market. Now, in recent years, it's been a push to incorporate market-based solutions into conservation issues, and there's been this increasing role of marketization in conservation solutions. Now, this has been mainly done due to international treaties such as the Paris Agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement 2 years ago, and then the REACH program for forest conservation. Now, one of the ways that they try to increase conservation is by adding market-based solutions. And one example of market-based solution is the payments for environmental services, that you might be familiar or aware of them. Now, to start, let's first try to have a definition of what will be a market, or how we will consider a market, at least for this presentation. And it will be a structure in which buyers and sellers, or agents, engage in repeated exchange of goods, services, or information, or any combination of them. And this, there's supposed to be something else there, but wasn't. Okay, so this definition allows us to incorporate any physical market that you might be aware of, like supermarkets or fish markets, and also virtual markets, like internet, eBay, or something like of the sort. At the same time, other types of market like financial markets or paper markets. Now, let's first try to identify what are the benefits of this market-based solution, or markets in general, and why they're being pushed into conservation. So, the main benefit is the benefits that come with being a market. And a market is characterized by being incentive compatible. Also, it increases information between the parties, in this case buyers and sellers, and reduces transaction costs, which allows you for more efficiency. Now, another benefit that has been seen is the reduction of poverty in average in some specific cases. So, by using market-based solutions, average poverty has decreased in some specific areas. Another benefit is that increases technological adoption of new techniques. So it improves environmental sustainability in a way. In general, and none of the animations are showing, that's fun. So it's going to be even more boring than it was before. In general, this allows us to say that market-based solutions tend to increase efficiency in a system. In this case, since we're trying to incorporate market-based solutions into sustainability or into conservation, it increases the efficiency of conservation. So you technically should get more conservation, however you define that by area or species or diversity. You should get more for the money that you're using or you're investing into this. Now, let's move to something that is a little more realistic than just the hope of markets being the best that we can get. There is some potential problems with markets. One of the problems is what it comes intrinsic to markets, and that is market failure. That markets are not going to be complete, you're not going to be able to account for everything inside that you're trying to create in terms of conservation in this case, that the incentives that you're going to put with the market-based solution are going to create externalities or some coordination failures. Now, this could lead, or in many cases does lead, to overexploitation of resources. In this case, overexploitation of fish, but it could be applied to any other natural resource. Now, there is also an increase in polarization inside the villages or the communities in which market-based solutions are applied. Now, I said before that poverty is reduced in average, and here is where the problem comes. Some people are more affected than others, and some can actually see their well-being decrease by the market-based solution. Although you have an average increase in wealth in the community, a segment of the population could be seriously damaged. And lastly, something that's been overlooked in most of the literature, whether it is economics or environmental or conservation literature, it's how markets can change people's preferences and can affect behavior, and this comes from the behavioral economics literature. The idea that when you subject people to a market, in the sense that, that I described before, it changes the way that they think. And this is exactly the point on which we're trying to focus and we're trying to analyze. How this behavior then in turn affect conservation and sustainability. Now the main areas in which, or the main points in which we're going to try to focus are collective action, externalities, or inflicting externalities, and equality. And these are the preferences that people have for collective action, or social norms, the preference that they have for inflicting externalities, and the preference that they have for equality in general. And I will come back to this in a minute. But before I move into that, I would like to explain a little more of what we mean by this interaction between markets and behavior and how it works. So we should go to a very known example, and some of you might know it, of daycare payments. So they had a problem, at least we have a picture here. So so this is related with one specific work done by SNISI in 2010 or 12, I'm not completely sure, in which they look at a daycare in Israel. And they had a problem. They had parents picking up their kids too late. So they thought of a way to solve it. Why don't we charge them a fee for being late? And they imposed a late pickup fee of roughly $4. So what was the result? Because they were expecting people to realize that now they have to spend extra money for being late, so they should come and pick their kids earlier. They got the opposite effect. Because now people knew how much it cost to be late. It just costed $4. So they could get an hour or 2 hours of extra care by paying very little. Now, where is the actual problem? That later, since the policy didn't work out as they expected, they withdrew that policy. Behavior did not change. People already had that information. People already knew that that's what it costed. The cost of being late was $4. So even if now they didn't have to pay it, it didn't change the way that they behave, because they incorporated new information into their decisions. Now, this will be like having a small community that doesn't care for one specific fish, for instance, but then some conservation group decides to come and pay them to conserve that fish that they never cared about before. Now they're going to wonder why there is somebody or some people caring about this fish. Now they have information about this fish. Now they might start extracting and exploiting that fish that they never cared about before. So consumption or harvesting of that fish will increase. Not that that has ever happened, but it could be a case. Now, another example that I can give you of how economic incentives sometimes have pervasive effects. And the first case is just a case in which they didn't really plan very well how to incorporate these incentives or these negative incentives, this punishment. in terms of incentive for academic achievement, the research has been more systematic, and it gives us better analysis of how behavior is changing. Now, in this case, the idea is what's the problem? The idea is try to increase students' performance in schools. Again, the way is offering incentives. Now, in this case, the incentives are not just monetary incentives, it's other types of compensation too. So they're trying to analyze how money works and how other type of compensation works in changing behavior. Now, in the short term, we have, the analysis, or the literature showed done by Levitt, John List, and Sneezy over a period of years. There is a big difference between inputs and outputs. What's an input? Things that the students can do easily, in a sense. For instance, increasing attendance, reading more books, enrolling in classes. When these are incentivized with a different type of compensation, they tend to increase. So you do have a positive output here in that sense, or a positive result. Now, when you tackle outputs and you try to compensate students for the grades, the result is not so good. Probably because they're not able to translate their effort into actual good grades. Now, the real question is, what happens in the long term? So in the long run, the results are mixed. Because in some cases, like increasing attendance and enrollment, students do keep this type of behavior for a long period of time, even after the program is finished, even after they go to college. So it does improve their behavior in that sense. But again, we have the idea that the incentives change how they behave. In other cases, it's not so good, and in some cases, it's pervasive, like compensating children to read. They read more books, but they start reading shorter books. So it depends on how the compensation is done. In other cases, they see no long-lasting effects. So now it's a good time to make an important question. Is this the effect of money that is changing how people behave, or is the market structure itself? Now, some argue that money is driving results because money does have negative connotations in some circumstances. So Dan Ariely specifically has shown over a period of years and several research that when you try to impose monetary condition or monetization into social behavior, it tends to have the opposite effect. Other streams of literature have also shown that when you change that type of compensation from money specifically to gifts or other goods that are not tradable for money, basically, you still have permanent short-term and long-term effects on people's behavior. So it seems that the answer is not just money. But on the topic of money, many have shown that the negative behavior is specifically related with relationships that are supposed to be based on trust. When you bring money into that relationship, it tends to break them. So if you feel like breaking up with a friend, next time that you ask a favor, pay them. Or next time that they invite you for dinner, pay for that dinner. You will realize that this is not the best way to mix money in those contexts. In other scenarios, it seems that it doesn't have that pervasive of an effect. Now, what has been the results across the literature in this regard? And I have to say that the literature is not abundant in this. But of the results, or of the papers that have done research in this area, 2/3 of them find that there is a negative effect of markets on human behavior. So it changes behavior for the worse. Now, how it will affect collective action that we mentioned before? Well, the results in terms of collective action show that there is a decrease in cooperation in average or in general. There is a crowding out of social norms and customs. and those are exchanged or replaced by market forces, and there is a reduction of trust in general. Now, how will this impact sustainability? This will have a big impact in collaborative management, for instance, or alliance formation that we heard before, since they depend heavily on collaboration of effort and time and resources. If that cooperation decreases, then it will be more likely that those alliances will break or that collaborative management is not going to be successful. What about inflicting externalities? So what happens now that people have been subjected to markets? Do they care more about others or inflicting externalities or less? The results show that people are more willing to inflict externalities in others now. So they care less about the damages that they are causing to other people. Now, this could have a big impact on fishing gear selection, for instance, from some fishermen, since they will be more inclined to use fishing gear that is more damaging to other species or to other fishermen. In terms of equality, we also have that there is a decrease in inequality aversion, or in other words, that people became more tolerant to inequality, so they care less. So this could have a big impact in resource governance, since now you could have people trapped in poverty traps and not being able to exit them or not receiving any help from their peers. So as you can see, by trying to connect these two streams of literature, you get an important insight that there is this negative implication of markets in human behavior and how this affects sustainability in general. Now, the question that we would like to answer in this case is, can we establish a direct link between markets, people preferences, and sustainability, which is not being done? I mean, we're just looking at two streams of literature so far that seems to be connected, but there is no direct connection. And in that same vein, it will be important to determine whether it is money that is changing how people behave, going back to the question of money versus market. Do market impact on social preferences the same way when there is natural resource involved? So when you have a strong connection between the community and the resource, do you still find the same kind of negative connotation? What about small communities, or what about strong social norms? Are any of these changing how market affects social behavior, and in turn how this affects sustainability and management of the resource? And then the ultimate objective is, if this is true, if markets are creating negative behavior and it's affecting sustainability in a negative way, can we create the mechanisms to eliminate these negative effects? So those are the line of research that we would like to follow. And of course, analyzing the mechanisms, the underlying mechanisms that change how people behave, which I didn't have time to mention here. Thank you.